Hello and welcome to our Mongo DB tutorial on Turbo 360. In the last video we scaffolded our project and set up the connection to our local Mongo database as well as tested it, so we're all set to go with our local Mongo setup. So in this video we're going to create our models for our project to work with, which will be profile and team. And that's it. So let's go ahead and get started. So here is my terminal. And here is the source code from the end of the last video. So let's go ahead and head back to our terminal and run the Mongo server. So in a separate tab, I'm running the local Mongo server. And then in the web server, I'm going to run turbo dev server. And then head over to localhost 3000 to make sure everything still works, which it does. So everything is still in working order, so I'm going to turn off the web server. Make sure you're in the root directory, and we're going to create a new folder called models, which is where we're going to store our models for profile and team, which will define the schemas for each. So we want to head over to that directory and create a profile.js, and we may as well do the team one right now as well. And then head back to the root. And let's go back to our models directory and open up the profile.js. And here is where we will define the schema, the attributes which comprise a profile in our project within the context of our project. So we're going to need the Mongoose ORM. So let's go ahead and import that. And then let's go ahead and create the profile schema, which is a new Mongoose schema object. Now make sure you insert the JSON argument here. And then let's go ahead and export it. Module exports. And this is a Mongoose model, which we will call profile, which takes the profile schema that we're about to define. So in here is where all of the action takes place. Here is where we define the actual attributes, which comprises a profile. So first name, last name, email, password, things like that. All that goes in here. So let's go ahead and get that process started. So we want to start with first name. And these all take JSON arguments, or these are all JSON values, excuse me. Last name, age, team, and position. Okay, great. So these are all empty JSON values, but obviously they shouldn't stay empty. So all of these attributes are going to be strings except for age. Age is going to be a number. So we want to define that in these JSON arguments. Inside these JSON values, we determine the data type of the respective attribute. So all of these are going to be string, except for the age, which is going to be a number. And then technically we can stop here, and this is a complete schema, but we can actually go, we want to take advantage of a few more options. We want to assign default values to all of these. And in the case of all the strings, the default value will be empty string. In the case of the number, it will be 0. So the default value basically gives these attributes an automatic value if the user doesn't input 1 during the process of creating the profile. So when there's data being sent to our server, if the first name attribute is undefined, the Mongoose schema will insert an empty string on our behalf, which is a nice tool. So this is one extra tool we can use that provided to us by Mongoose to make this our data more consistent in the Mongo database. So another tool we want to use is called trim, and this is a Boolean which we will set to true. So what this does is that it removes any trailing white space. So for example, if we have a user named Bob, like so, Bob, During registration, Bob may have done something like this, where he put an empty space at the trailing edge by mistake. In all likelihood, this is not on purpose. So we want to trim those trailing and as well as preceding white spaces so that this doesn't mess up our database integrity. So we definitely want to take advantage of things like that. So we want to trim the last name as well, team, and the position. And there are a series of other options we can include, which we won't get to for now. Just understand that the Mongoose ORM provides us a series of tools like this, which makes the data more consistent within our Mongo database, so that it's across all of our records. There's more consistency within the attributes, which is very, 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 very useful. So now that we have our profile set up, schema set up, the question is, how can we query those profiles? How can we use this to fetch the profiles from our backend? So what we're going to do is we're going to use one of the provided routes from the scaffold, specifically the API route. The API route is provided to us automatically from the scaffold. We're not going to use what's in here, so let's get rid of this. And we're going to create our own routes instead. So what we want to do is create a get handler, which takes a string argument, and we're going to call it profile. And this get handler will fetch all the profiles currently in our Mongo database. So this takes a request, and a response object. And for now, we're just going to return a JSON response with a hard-coded output. Sometimes these are called endpoints instead, so we'll just call this endpoint. So right now, that's all it's going to return. Right, so what we want to do is we want to test that endpoint by heading back to our terminal, running the dev server, head over to localhost 3000. Now if you look at the app.js, you'll see that the routes are connected on the bottom, and you'll see that the API route is connected in the path with the path /API. So if we do /API and then /profile, that will invoke this endpoint. So we do /API/profile, and here we have the endpoint we just wrote a few minutes ago. So that worked. So now what that means is within this endpoint, we can query the profiles using this schema. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have to import that, of course. Okay, so now here we have our profile model, which is a Mongoose object. So we want to run the find query, which returns a promise, and the promise success block returns the profiles from the database. So we can get rid of this now. And this right here is our first Mongo/Mongoose query. This is going to query every profile currently in our Mongo database, our backend, and return them in this success block right here. So we can do res.json and then confirmation success data profiles, and that will return the profiles in our browser just like it did over here. And before we finish that though, let's handle the error scenario. So this is the catch block, which is the error case. So we want to return an error message here. Obviously the confirmation is not success, it's fail. And then we should return a message from the error object, which should indicate what went wrong. So this query right here is for every profile in our database, our Mongo database. So now if we rerun this request, we should see an empty array because there are no profiles in our database. So that's the expected outcome, because right now we don't have any profiles. So here what we've done is we've set up a very simple query for a schema that currently is defined in the models as per this set of attributes right here, and then we ran a request against that schema, but we don't have any data in the backend, so right now we're just getting empty results set. So far so good, but obviously we want to have some data to work with. So in the next video, we're going to set up our database with some initial data, what's often called seed data, using some static JSON objects. And then we will insert those records into our database so that when we run this query, we have some stuff to work with. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully you got all this working, and thanks for watching.